I just finished reading Fourth Wing. So, is it as good as everybody's saying? Can it teach us about writing? And why do we think it's gone viral? And is it as good as everybody says? We're about to find out. Here are my thoughts and my review of Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros. Hey everyone, and welcome to another video. So, I finally gave in and read Fourth Wing. So, obviously, because I haven't been under a rock for the last months, years, whatever, I have heard about Fourth Wing. I've heard about Iron Flame. I've heard about how viral it is. I've heard reviews of it from some of my people that I love watching on YouTube, and I've been interested in it. So my cousin read it, and I thought about giving it a chance before, and the whole reason why I started this book was kind of interesting, so I'm going to tell you the story about that. So, a couple weeks ago, I need to figure out the date. Okay, so the last weekend in June, my sister, husband, and cousin and I went to Branson on a vacation, and we stayed the night, went to Silver Dollar City. It was so much fun. We had a blast. On the way home, we started listening to the audiobook for Fourth Wing, and let me tell you guys, this book absolutely blew my mind. So we got to chapter 7 by the time we got all the way home. We stopped in Springfield, did some running around, so we were listening to the audiobook then. I'm getting ahead of myself. So basically there's this girl named Violet, and her mother's the general, and she gets like conscripted kind of into this war college. The entire initiation is like you have to cross this parapet, and that entire sequence was so intense, and the narrator of the audiobook did a really fantastic job. And we were in the car listening to this thing, and we were like invested. My sister is not a book reader. She's read maybe like 1 or 2 books in the last several years. So it has to really interest her. She loves movies and TV shows and video games. She's not really much of a book reader. This girl was in the back seat, freaking out, making comments. Me and my cousin were just my husband too, was just laughing, and it was just so intense. We just had to know what happened next. We couldn't get enough of it. And like I said, we were running around in Springfield, so anytime we'd have to get out of the car and stop the scene, we would be like rushing to get back in to like keep hearing it. It was hilarious, and we had an absolute ball. So we were in Springfield when my sister bought this copy right here at a Barnes & Noble, and she took it home, and she decided to pick up where we left off, which was in the middle of chapter 7. I decided to start over. My original idea was to let her finish the book first, and that way we didn't have to pass this copy back and forth. And I was also in the middle of reading Midnight Sun at this time, so I thought I could try to finish Midnight Sun and then give her time to finish this one, and then I would start this over, because I don't like audiobooks because I comprehend better if I read the words myself. It's how my brain works. So I decided that I wanted to start it over to soak in all the details I might have missed listening. But I just couldn't get back into Midnight Sun after this amazing book just captured and hooked us and just reeled us in. So I started reading it. So she kept her, as you can see, she still has her little pink sticky note here because she hasn't finished it yet. And so we decided to keep 2 different bookmarks, and just read the same book and pass it back and forth. She has a day schedule, I have a night schedule. You know, it worked, the timing works out anyway. So while she picked up in chapter 7, I started all the way over. So I counted the day that I officially started reading this book, because it was the day I started this official book over, was the 4th of July. Yeah, because we went 3rd of July, we hung out with my family. 4th of July, we hung out with my in-laws. My sister brought this copy with her, and she read it most of the evening, and she got to like chapter 9. And so I sat down that night and I was like, okay, I gotta catch up to her. So I read from chapters 1 almost to chapter 9. I think I was like a little bit behind her. And then the next day she woke up and she's like, oh, by the way, I'm on chapter 19. And I'm going, you did 10 chapters? So it was basically after the 4th of July. Today is July 9th. So the last 5 days I've just been trying to catch up with my sister, which was hilarious because she's not a book reader, and we've always thought that she's a bit of a slower reader compared to me, not by much, but so it's like this is proven she reads faster than I do. It's bizarre. So last night she read chapter 35, which was a major chapter, and my cousin warned us, like, you're gonna need to comfort her when she gets to chapter 36. So last night I was like speed reading to try to get to chapter 35, and I finally, for the first time, caught up with her last night, and I got to put my bookmark right there beside hers. So tonight she took the book before bed, read chapter 36, gave it to me. I read chapter 36. The same day that we watched episode 4 of season 2 of The House of Dragon. So if you've seen that show, you kind of know what happens there. Yeah, not a good time to read chapter 36 of this book. So after my husband and I had dinner and watched our show, I decided to read, and I did not realize this was the end of the book, because the rest of it is the acknowledgments and a glimpse at another book, and I finished it, and it's only 2:43 in the morning, which is the beginning of my evening. So I don't know what to do with myself. So let's get into my review now that you know the backstory of how this all came to be. Like I said, I started over and I started reading it for myself on July 4th, and it's July 9th, technically the 8th, because I haven't gone to bed yet. So I read it in basically 4 to 5 days, which is pretty fast considering. So I had 3 critiques about this book, which we'll talk about in a minute, but I love the world building and the race building, the dragons, the dragon building, which I would consider kind of biology building, because there's a lot of that in there. I love the race. I love the military. I love the strategies. This book is so creative. I honestly feel like it may be revitalizing, like, the fantasy genre in kind of a way, because I haven't, like, the opening, this little tagline here says, the most brutally addictive fantasy I've read in a decade, and I feel like it's so true. Like, I read the entire Court of Thorns and Roses series by Sarah J. Maas, and I was into it. I read a lot of 5-star reads and reviewed them on this channel, but I have not been obsessed with a book like this since I was a teenager. I feel personally like, and I haven't been a teenager for a little bit, so because there's a difference between, like, in the evening I'm coming, okay, like, I'm reading this book, I'm kind of into it, and then, but just doing it in my reading time, and then outside of that time I'm doing whatever, compared to literally being at this grocery store waiting for food to cook, and my idle brain is just going back to Fourth Wing, or I'm watching something and I'm like, but what about Fourth Wing? And it's just like the thought, like, I haven't been obsessed with this book in a long time beyond my own, like, as a writer, like, we writers do that too. I feel like if you're really into the story you're writing, you'll do that. Your brain will drift, and any idle time your brain has, you'll start thinking about your book. That's what happened with me with Fourth Wing. And I also was, like, trying to pick my sister's brain, like, what is it about this book that made you, a non-book reader, pick it up and just love the heck out of this book? And she couldn't really tell me the answer, because it's like, as an author, I want to know what about this is just so addicting. So the main character, Violet, she has this condition, which is a real life condition, but I don't know the name of it. And it's like her joints are really weak, and like like if she bumps them, they'll like break, and it's just like, and pop out of place. So it gives her this like disability and this hindrance, which a lot of people are like, oh, we need to have more diversity in books and stuff like that. And I'm like, okay, I don't care. But I feel like actually having like the disability of this character really helps the plot line. Like, it really makes you root for her. Like, the first time that she's crossing that parapet, that scene, I'll never forget. The 4 of us in the car, just like leaning into the front of the car, just like so intense, just waiting for what's going to happen, and forgetting that we're in Springfield on our way home from vacation, because it pulled us right into this addicting world. And again, she's conscripted by her mom, the general, who's this cold-hearted witch, into this war college, and she's supposed to be a scribe. She's not built for the riders quadrant, and the riders, they're dragon riders, so they go through, a lot of them die, because the process of riding a dragon's a lot more complicated. Which, by the way, the fun thing about this, the other thing is just, it's so realistic, it feels real. Like, you have a lot of other books that do dragon riders. That's not a new trope by any means. But like, you just hop on a dragon and you're having fun and it's fine. And I've never seen a book that is realistic with, you're gonna have to like run and jump to get on the dragon because they're this high. You're gonna have to stay on when they're flying around because you're gonna get knocked off from the wind. And let me tell you, the descriptions of this when they're actually like on dragons and in flight and stuff was so visceral. Like, I can feel it, and it made me realize, and this could have been because in our vacation in Branson we went to Silver Dollar City. I haven't rode a roller coaster in a hot minute, and since I was a teenager with the last time I rode one, I have gotten a lot more motion sick, scared of heights, and just basically weak, just in general. So when I rode the roller coaster on Branson, I thought it was going to kill me. Like, it was so bad. And I remember we rode up the hill and I was like, what am I doing? What am I doing? What did I do? Like, it's too late. You can't back out now. And then you go down a little bit, and then the drop, like, it's like you have that description where your stomach flies into your throat. Your stomach's just left behind, like it was just this straight drop. Like, I closed my eyes. I can't tell you what happened because I closed my eyes the entire time we were on the roller coaster, which did do loops, and we were upside down. At one point we were upside down. I felt myself like lifting up out of my seat, like the other way, like I was going this way because we were upside down, and it like stopped. After that, when I read the descriptions of this book, that is so fresh in my mind because we just went like last weekend, like a couple weekends ago, the last weekend in June. The descriptions of this book made it seem real, and so like dragons aren't real, obviously, but the closest we'll ever come to like flying on one is like a roller coaster. And it made me realize that flying on a dragon would not be easy, and I couldn't do it. And like, just the realism of flying on a dragon, because if they're in the air and you're on their back, it's going to feel like a roller coaster because they're going to go this way, they're going to go that way, they're going to do barrel rolls. And it never occurred to me. I've never had that included in a fantasy. And again, the whole aspect of like practicing to jump on your dragon, who is like 20 or 30 feet tall, you're going to have to like run and jump. And so it reminded me of American Ninja Warrior, some of their training scenes where they're like running up the wall and jumping up, like they run to the wall and then it's like a 14-foot wall and you jump up the wall, and it's like you practice that so that if you're in combat on the ground, you can hurry up and get on top of your dragon. And it made me realize that there's a physicality to riding dragons that is so realistic that they include in this book, that is so addicting, so realistic, and just I never thought about it, and I've never seen another fantasy do this before. So as I was reading it, my husband and I were talking because he did listen to the first 7 chapters with us too. It gives me major Divergent vibes, but in a completely different way than Divergent, because Divergent, Divergent is like post-Earth, post-apocalyptic, and YA, so it's for a younger audience. But the aspect of getting sent into this place and the faction divisions and having to go through training within that faction, and then like in Divergent, she's sent to Dauntless, which is like fearless, so you're doing all this crazy stunts, and she's not built for it, and so she grows into herself as she does all these dangerous stunts. That aspect is definitely in this book. I don't know if the author intended that. It could have just been a coincidence because it's been a hot minute since Divergent was even a popular thing. But that's kind of what you get here, because the scribe quadrant is very different. There's other quadrants in the book that are mentioned, but she's in the writer's quadrant, and again, she's got that physical condition. She's not built for this. She wasn't intended to train for this. Most writers who go into this quadrant have been training their whole lives for this, so she's definitely like behind. Even if she didn't have a physical condition that made her bones snap and stuff, like she would be behind because of that. And then the physicality of it, and it's like beyond Dauntless, but it has that kind of vibe and feel to it. There is a romance in this, and I've actually seen a lot of people classify this as a fantasy romance or a romantasy. It actually isn't. And I'll give you the reason why. If you compare this to A Court of Thorns and Roses, the plot line in A Court of Thorns and Roses is about the romance, and there's other, like, the world's gonna get conquered and kind of like otherworldly kind of war going on in the background, but the majority of the plot is about the romance. And in this one, there is a romance and there is a romantic plot line, but if you take that out, there's still a plot, there's still a story here. And that's how you know if you have just a fantasy or a fantasy romance. Like, take the romance out, do you still have a plot or not? And this works for any genre besides just fantasy. So if you think you have a romance, whether it's a crossover with fantasy, sci-fi, contemporary, whatever, take the romance story out of the book. Do you still have a plot? Do you still have a story? If you do, then it's not a true romance. romance, your romance is just a subplot. But if you take the romance out of the book and you're not left with a plot or a story, then it is a romance first, regardless of the subgenre. And so while the romance plays a major part in this for both characters and the situations and stuff going on, there's still a bigger plot going on, and the plot mostly revolves around her surviving, because let's face it, she's pretty much here like not gonna survive. It's pretty drilled into here from other characters that you're not gonna make it, you're gonna die, that whole thing. Yeah, so that's just the first things that I love. The characters are so realistic. I love the characters and their motivations and like why they do what they do. And a lot of them, like their personalities are very clear, and it's very easy to distinguish who's who. There's a lot of new names kind of thrown in, and so I may not remember like all the names immediately, but like it's very easy to latch on to, okay, this character, that character. Violet is written in a way that I like, which is rare, because you have the risk of being a Mary Sue, you have, and which she can't, but like the effort of training that she goes through, like, is just so realistic when you compare her to characters like Rey from Star Wars, the sequels, who just gets this power and just is good at everything, whereas she has to fight and claw her way for everything that she does and everything that she goes through. And even when that like become a hero moment happens at different points in the story, it's not easy, and it's not like, you know, at the end of like a book or a movie where an archer, a female character or whatever, is about ready to do the thing, and they're gonna like shoot the bow and arrow, and they may miss a couple times, but they're gonna shoot the bow, and the arrow is gonna hit the target, and you know it's going to. I don't know if I'm pulling from an actual inspiration or not, but you know my point. Like when the main hero is gonna do something, and you may have a few false moments where, okay, they miss or something goes wrong or whatever, but in the end they do it. It's like one of those moments where it just takes so much more effort to get there that it's so realistic, and it's like the opposite of a Mary Sue character, that it's so well written. So there is some spice in this, which I didn't like, but I did skip over those scenes. There's 2 of them in the book. One of them spans the majority of a chapter, so you can just skip over the chapter and pretty much not miss anything. There's some important tidbits and conversation afterward, but it's pretty skippable and you kind of see it coming. The character voice was really unique, and the writing style I feel like works really well, because she writes in first person present. And let me tell you, just like every other famous author that I've read so far, she writes very passively, and she has a lot of run-on sentences that as an editor I would have taken away some commas and put periods there and started new sentences, and she just kind of runs on a lot. But she gets by with it because first person present kind of allows for that, because it's like the character in the moment, living it, doing it, feeling it, and you can get by with a lot of that stuff. Whereas like when I read A Court of Thorns and Roses, it's in past tense, and it's more noticeable because there's a lot of was this and was that. And so it's like and that one did stand out to me when I read A Court of Thorns and Roses versus this one. I like my editing brain shut off pretty quickly, pretty early on, which is good. Like, you know, you've got a good book if you can shut my editing brain off, because it's hard for that to happen. So the main love interest in this book is amazing. He is everything that I ever want in a male character, everything I ever want to write in a main male character, and everything I strive to write in a main male character. I wouldn't change anything. I mean, I obviously would, but he is absolutely perfect. I love it. I can't really say much more than that. The threshing. So if you've read this book, you know what I'm talking about, but there's different points in the story, because the War College has their certain, like, what would be the equivalent of the end of a semester, that sort of thing. And so there's different points. The one that you're trying to get to that really intrigued me the most, that I was like, okay, I want to get to the threshing, I want to know what happens, was the threshing. And my husband Michael doesn't read this genre a whole lot, but even he, like, we stopped in chapter 7, so it's not the threshing yet, but even he's like thinking about reading it because he wants to know what happens at threshing. So obviously I'm not going to tell him. That was really intriguing. And then there's the war games, which was like you're waiting, the gauntlet thing, and then the threshing, and then the war games. So there's different points where you're kind of like, okay, I want to get to this next event. But hear me out. I said War College several times, and the reason why I say that is because it does not feel like YA. This feels like an adult book. The characters are also adults as well. They're in their 20s. It does not feel like high school. It does not feel like college. It doesn't feel like Harry Potter. It doesn't even feel like, sometimes you'll have those college-ish moments, but like in a fantasy setting, which is pretty cool. But it feels to me like a war college. You're here to learn how to ride a dragon, how to fight, how to kill, how to go to war. And that is the intention with this college, and that's why it feels more mature. And I love that aspect, because it for me, like, I can't really read a whole lot of books that are like the other way, where it's just like petty high school drama or whatever, you know what I mean? Like, it really ups the stakes, and it's dangerous. So it's not just like, oh, there's no action, you're just in college. Like, the characters in this, there's like a really low percentage of people surviving, and so there's constant risks of characters dying. Not just the main character, which there is a risk of her dying too, but the characters around her as well. So you're constantly like hooked. There's that constant like need to like keep reading to find out what happens next, basically. There's a lot of twists in this book. I did call some of them I didn't see coming. There was one hilarious twist that one scene made me think it was going to be one thing, and I'm being vague because I don't want to spoil things, but it had to do with the threshing, so I'll just leave it at that. But one scene made me think threshing was going to go one way, and then another scene kind of made me think it was going to go another way. And then I was like, okay, well, which way is it going to be? Because I can't figure out which one it's going to be. And I could not figure it out. And it turned out it was both, basically. And it was so creative. There's a lot of action in this book, which is so intense. Like, the majority of the action happens at the end, but there is a lot of like action. I don't want to spoil that. We'll just say that the ending is rather intense. Chapter 35 is pretty intense. Chapter 36, you're going to need tissues. And then from there to the end, it's nail biting. You can't stop reading. That's what happened to me. So let's get to my critiques, because I'm the kind of person, I can enjoy a book, rate it high, and still acknowledge the issues that I had with it without it docking a star rating. So for me, a star rating thing has to be something big that took me out of the story. That sort of thing. So my 3 critiques, there is woke stuff thrown in here, but it's not heavy-handed and it's easy to ignore, and that's the reason why it's not docking a star, because normally that just sucks me right out of the story and would dock a star rating in a movie, book, show, anything like that. There's one character that is the they them, which is stupid. If you say they, them, you sound like a moron. You don't know basic grammar. That is a plural term, and it just sounds convoluted, forced, and awkward. And that's how it came across the few times it's been mentioned in here. It's very brief and easy to overlook. There was one character in here who it implies that she's kind of a lesbian-like character, but again, it's kind of briefly mentioned and then you just overlook it. So the woke stuff, it bothered me when I read it, but it was easily forgettable, and we move right on past it. So just something to mention, but not something that detracted or took away from my enjoyment of the story, because once you read past it, it's over with, it's done. It doesn't impact the story in a meaningful way at all. Second critique, along with the woke stuff, there's a little bit of heavy feminism in the middle. You guys, if you've watched me for any length of time, you know I don't like feminism. I'm not a big feminist at all. So there's several moments where they're on the training mats, and I noticed all the fights, it's always a female beating a male character. There's never a moment when a male defeats a female character, except for one moment that is between the main guy and the main girl, and that's for a specific plot purpose. So if you take that out, none of the characters around there ever shows a male character defeating a female character, which they're supposed to be on equal par with each other, and where like they're all just riders and warriors training for war. So it felt a little weird. And then there's one moment between the main guy and the main girl where she's like, he's toxic, you shouldn't find him attractive. She's kind of thinking that to herself, and when she thought to herself, you shouldn't find him attractive, it's toxic, it threw me off and like sucked me right out of the ship moment between them, because it just made me roll my eyes. Like, can we not just get a good enemies to lovers romance where the guy actually does some enemy like things to the girl without it being like toxic? Like, let's just enjoy it for what it is. And yes, there is an enemies to lovers trope in here. It is done so well. And I would say, like, it is the best enemies to lovers romance I have ever read, and I don't think anything will write an enemies to lovers romance that is done better than this for me. The chemistry between them was really good, but for me, there were some parts I was a little worried that it was gonna get like all romantic fantasy does, and especially romance in general these days, where it's like everything is about the physical chemistry between the characters and the spice and not an actual emotional connection. I was a little worried about that a few times, but it kind of brings back the emotional connection. So far that hasn't been an issue, but that remains to be seen in book 2. So that was my second critique, woke stuff, feminism. My third one is kind of this minor thing and is me just being really nitpicky. But there was one scene where she's doing this thing called the gauntlet, and it's like an obstacle course. The obstacles were basically taken from American Ninja Warrior, because I used to love watching that show. And don't get me wrong, my book Survivor that will be coming out this fall, like, I do it too. We all, like, if you do any sort of obstacle course thing, you're gonna pull from like American Ninja Warrior and Survivor and shows like that. Like, it's pretty typical. That didn't bother me. It was easy to picture because of that, but I did like how, even though they were pulled from American Ninja Warrior, they were tweaked to fit this universe, and it made logical sense. Like the big wall, like, that's an American Ninja Warrior thing, but that's to learn how to jump on your dragon. You know, each obstacle had a purpose for learning what you have to learn that made logical sense in the universe, and that's what I like. But there was one part where it shows her practicing, because you had time to practice on the gauntlet before you actually did it for your test or whatever, where it's like this moment with this pillar, and her solution to it, in the, like, she has trouble getting up it because she's short and all that stuff. And then the day of, this minor spoiler but not a big deal, she uses a rope and somehow uses that to like anchor herself, and it's like, well, why didn't just anybody else do that? And it felt a little Mary Sue-ish, but like the rest of it was good in her, because the thing about this character is, because of her physical limitations, she has to use her brain. She's intelligent and smart, and she has to use her intelligence to stay alive. Even her sister kind of tells her that before she goes to the first initial tryout kind of thing. So the creative thing about this book is a lot of the things that she goes through, she has to think things through and like think outside the box. And so for me, that one wasn't as well thought out or creative as the other things. Like the way that she helps herself through combat where she's fighting and the least little punch is gonna like snap her bones. The way that she goes about going at that is so creative and well thought out that it felt like a little less creative for the pillar. But then the very next one with the wall I was talking about, that part was creative. So it was literally one section of one obstacle course, and it was just kind of annoying when I read it, and it made me fall out of it when I read it, but it's fine. So the threshing, the entire thing going about threshing was so intense, and there's a lot of moments like that, and that reminds me of the other thing that I love. Now that I'm done, those were my only 3 critiques for the whole book, other than the spice, which it was toward the end, so it like wasn't, and it's skippable. So those are my 3 critiques about the book. But that leads me into my next part that I love, and from a writing standpoint, this author, Rebecca Yarros, is a master at pacing. Oh my gosh, I swear, I don't know how she does it, but like every chapter, not every chapter, but the majority of chapters will end on some sort of hook or cliffhanger, which we all know that that's what you're supposed to do. But some of them she doesn't resolve, and the next chapter will jump a little bit of time, a couple days or a week or a night or something, and through the story, whether it's characters interacting or events that are happening or whatever, you'll kind of find out how it was resolved in a natural and exciting way. But like, you won't actually get that moment, and it makes you want more because you want to keep reading. And then you're looking for these events like threshing and the gauntlet and the war games and like these different events that are coming like in the summer and then the fall, and like you're waiting for that to happen. You're waiting for the plot to get there. And those moments, like threshing, was so exciting that afterwards, then you're back in scenes with the class and just regular stuff, and it felt a little slower. So you like hit these peaks of excitement, and then it kind of slows back down a little bit, and just when you start to get a little bored, it jumps back up and gets exciting again, and it keeps you hooked. Like it keeps you hooked, and it is a master form of writing with pacing. Like I almost want to read this book again and just take writer's notes, because she does so much that I feel like is good for writers to do, and that's part of why she's gone viral. So yeah, have I gone on about this book long enough? I don't know. If you haven't read it, read it. Fourth Wing. It is such a good book. It is my new favorite book of all time, and I like it better than the entire A Court of Thorns and Roses series. And you guys know I loved those books, and some of those were 5-star ratings for me. It puts that series to shame. It literally makes that series feel and sound like it was written by, I don't know, it makes that feel like such, like, on a completely different level. It's such a good book. And now I want to cuddle with my stuffed animal dragons, which I've got one up there, but oh my gosh. And then the dragon building, there's a lot of, like, I call it like biology, the biology of the dragons, and like, oh, you have the oranges and the reds and the greens, and they're also classified by their tails. So like you have the sword tails or the club tail like type. Was super creative. Yeah, and then the dragons being more beast-like. Like, I, for some reason, always do the dragons having a human form in a lot of my books, because I just like having dragons that have human forms. But the dragons being more beast-like really works for this story. There are character dynamics that I love between Violet and characters around her, especially some characters that I can't talk about. Love it. I love it so much. I love the entire concept of the writers and the bond between the writer and the dragon. Also, every chapter has like these little quotes. First of all, this map, like, look at that map. And also, I didn't know this, because I was reading the book and I'm like, man, I wish they had a map of the War College, because it really describes going here and going there, and I can't keep it all straight. It does. So if you buy this book and you're wondering, Mom, I don't know where they are. I wish they had a map of the wing that they're in. It does. Just figure it out before you get to the middle of the book like I did. So that's there. But anyways, before each chapter, I gotta get to it. And this is the beginning. It has these little quotes from like texts in their world, and they're always significant to the chapter. So that's really, really creative, but it's also giving you tidbits on their history from different like history books or textbooks or a journal in their world. That's always significant, and teaching you more and more about the plot. That's like really super creative. And then there's also some plot elements that are included in here that in the beginning that are relevant later on. So it was really I almost wanted to tab it. I don't normally tab books like this. I only use tabs for like my books when I'm proofreading, but it made me want to take notes about certain things because I wondered if they're going to come into play later. 5 stars. Like 5 stars on a whole new level that my other 5-star books that I've reviewed lately don't stand up to. 5 stars. 11 stars. All the stars. I love this book. I cannot express to you guys how much, like, it's revitalized me as a writer. Well, as a writer, honestly, this book has intimidated me, and it's like, what are we even doing? Like, why am I even trying to write or publish anything because this book exists? So it's very intimidating, but it's such a good book, and I feel like I've missed having an addiction to a book where it's like, that's what your brain is thinking of. That's what you want to do when you get home. That's what you're thinking about, besides my own books, of course, as opposed to just, okay, it's my reading time, I'm going to read a little and then do whatever. Like, all I wanted to do was read this book. This is such a good book, and you better believe I'm going to get Iron Flame and start reading it as fast and as soon as I can. So this is still part of my 4th Ring review. I also forgot to mention that the magic building in this is also very, very creative and very, very unique. And the whole book itself is like really unique and original. And even though there's elements that like seem similar to like Divergent, or one aspect of this was the Rebellion, which reminded me very similar to the Uprising in the Mortal Instrument series by Cassandra Clare. There were elements that were similar. It still feels very unique and very original and a unique take on some things. And it just, the magic system is so creative, just like the dragons and the war military and the way that the society is structured and like everything. But I had to add that too because it's just so good. This is a good book. If you haven't read it, go read it. If you don't like spice, it's fine. You can skip over it. read this book. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. And if in the meantime, if you liked this video, please be sure to give it a like and subscribe for more writing and reading videos every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And in the meantime, if you liked my review of this book, then check out my review of A Court of Thorns and Roses. As I just said, it's not as good as this one, but it's still pretty darn good, and I give you all of my thoughts in that video, so check that out. You don't want to miss it.